resources as fast as possible. You get all the cash you can from government as fast as possible. Right? And then you come to Tamaya because we're non-dilutive and you get the cash you can from Tamaya. And only then do you issue equity and give away your company. Right? That, to me, that's sort of the order of operation. Everyone's making a bashful advertisement here. And I've been in the equity game for a long, long time before Tamaya. Right? So because Tamaya is unique in that we're non-dilutive. Right? So you don't have to give away your company to get the capital. I think the key point here is you can't eat revenue, right? You can only eat cash, right? So if you, the difference between revenue and the importance of the difference between revenue and cash is that next year, your revenue doesn't pay your rent. Your cash pays your rent. And that's the fundamental issue, right? So if you're continuing to manage cash and you're getting cash as fast as you can, you have to be cognizant of the fact that if you spend that today, you don't have that to pay rent tomorrow or pay salaries tomorrow. So that's the big planning point, I think, here.
I know this is antithetical to the current movement and the romance of doing a startup, but like I'm 40 this year. I've done a startup. I'm doing one now. I've got maybe this one and one more in me. To me, the VC route seems like it's a binary outcome. You're either tremendously successful or you get nothing. And about
worried about the accounting implications. Well, I have to get back to my customer, right? So I think that if you are getting to a point where you think that my financial statements are going to be looked at by decision-making document, and having somebody kind of do some tips and tricks on topic for discussion. And again, it comes down to what commitments are you making to your customer over what period of time.
So, sorry, on that topic, I think sometimes it's pretty simple in that we'll take a recurring revenue portion of a contract and we'll give it a multiple of 3 or 4 or maybe 5, depending on the company, and that'll sort of derive a value for the company. And the ProServe portion will get kind of a 1x. So I think to support what you're saying, I think having a look at that contract in the context of how much is ProServe and how much is the recurring portion is really important from a valuation perspective. If you do choose to go to venture capital route, which we're not advocating, but if you do choose to go that route, it's really, really critical to make sure you think through what looks like recurring and what looks like ProServe.
So is that like common knowledge that this is how you value a SaaS company?
You can argue over the multiple, but yeah, generally, yeah.
And revenue, EBITDA, that kind of.
There's a lot more. I mean, there's a lot more behind that around.
But you know, bring it on the back of the napkin just to see
Sure.
where you're at, who you are, what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean,
Like I think
the investor view is going to be that the recurring is recurring, so you get a bigger multiple because it's in the bucket of this is going to show up every month, or quarter, or year, depending on the least, and so you know that's cash that we can use to pay bills and whatever, as opposed to the professional services piece, which will be whereas okay, that's one and done, right? So that's great. You got a pile of cash that'll help rent this year, but now we're back in software as a licensed land where you had a great quarter and you're starting at 0 all over again. And that may not be exactly how it works for, say, your business, but sort of in the investor lens, that's how those things tend to get received.
Yeah, what commitments do you have? What people are? How many returning customers? And that's where that recurring revenue number.
But Dave Borelli just observed that it was 5 or 6 years ago where they transitioned from trying to incent their salespeople to get cash up front rather than some other metric. And that cash up front doesn't mean shoving stuff into ProServe. It simply means incenting your customer to pay a lump sum as opposed to pay monthly. Right? So those are two fundamentally different ideas, right? So ProServe up front versus a monthly fee that you pay in a lump sum up front for some kind of a discount.
Yeah, so software album is something I would think about as well. So our business, we're 80% subscription, 20% one time. And I was looking at last year's numbers, and the one-time ones are quicker cash, and the subscription takes much more capital to build and scale. But obviously it gets valued higher as well. So what I'm curious about is what other, I guess, growth strategies other companies you're seeing are applying around that. Because for us, we could turn up our one-time a little bit more, get more cash, or if that impacts valuation, things like that. So these are levers and trade-offs, but I'm just curious to see what other people are trying around how you build and scale a business.
Like, so to me, I would kind of say, heard Andrew's comment earlier, get more cash sooner. I'm a finance guy, so I like cash because I do things. And to me, the secondary consideration is what are you trading off? So if you're getting more cash up front, but economically you're leaving money on the table that's meaningful because your customer's smart and that's the trade-off they're forcing you to make, I wouldn't do it unless you have to do it, payroll and all those fun things. And the rest will kind of take care of itself, in my view. Now, if you happen to have a nice, friendly neighborhood, private equity or venture capital guy there requiring certain things in order to facilitate an exit or whatever, you might have to make some different decisions. But to me, you want to do the right thing for them.
Yeah.
So we have a sticky company. It's a long sale process, but we get paid quite a bit for the implementation, and then the implementation continues and further entrenches us in that company where they're growing their usage internally, and we're paid marginally for their increased usage based on transactions, plus a base subscription fee. But if I was trying to maximize the value on paper based on what you're talking about, I'm definitely damaging the long-term amount of money that I'm going to get out of these customers, and even the medium term.
Well, sorry, I want to clarify my point on that. I think my point in relation to what you're doing is you're not changing the way you're doing business, but you might change the way you pay for the contract, which might give him some air cover in putting more into recurring revenue and less just breaking the revenue, not changing what you're actually doing in the underlying business, but just getting more into the recurring bucket from an accounting perspective, which would then allow you to get a higher valuation on your business.
That's tough when you're selling to clients that want to see that they're going to use you, and not invest a bunch in, hundreds of thousands of dollars in the equivalent of professional services before they've seen how sticky you are, or before they've seen how much you're helping the business.
I think that the relevant comment to that, though, is all value. Value is what someone's will pay, obviously, but the context there is going to be very different depending on. So my experience, for whatever it's worth, has been the end value, if it happens to be probably more likely being acquired, or you're just running a business that's generating cash. Acquirers aren't generally dumb usually. If you've got a model that makes sense and is really sticky, they're less concerned about what buckets things are.
See, the feedback we're actually getting from our clients is that they're okay if we end up making a lot more money off of them in the long run, without putting a bunch of money into a project that they're not convinced on yet. They want to see a couple of years of implementation and growth.
You want to have some outs.
Yeah.
If you happen to be going a route where you need a significant amount of outside capital, then you're going to be valued based on the type of metrics we're talking about, where that differentiation can be meaningful, because that's going to be factoring into what growth's required, so Mr. Investor can make a return that covers off the 8 failures that they've had elsewhere. Right. So depending on what your requirements are and the path of the company, can have a big impact on whether this is a significant.
You can see how that would
it's
hamper a
non-issue.
founder's decision making, though, and drive them in a way that's not necessarily the best way for that business.
And they're like, accounting is not black and white. It is a bit of an art form. And so if you know your goals from a business point of view and from a metrics point of view, there are things you can do in a contract to make it try and achieve both, and kind of go down the middle and judgment there, right? So sometimes things are black and white, right? That it's like, you have to do it this way. Like, you have a commitment for the next 2 years. You can't take this revenue now. Sometimes that's black and white. But when you have contracts that have various outs, and you have contracts that are for multiple terms, and there are things in wording you can put in there, like talking to someone who's just like a account, to say, okay, this is not a standalone service. We don't sell this on its own, so the value of it is really not very high. So we're just going to put a cost model on this, and therefore this piece of revenue, the chunk that would come out that doesn't get smaller, and then take this over here. Like, so it's an art form, right? There's things you can do, but it's hard to be definitive because it's dependent on the business, what your business goals are and what your cash.
I would add to that it's like, people shouldn't view it as a complete linear line as to how they approach our last business. To Transcontinental a few years back, we had a cash heavy strategy, like all the way through the 8th year, that we targeted. We were going to sell the 3 companies in Canada we would sell them to. We figured out what would motivate them in terms of paying the premium on the value, and then we switched all our contracts, right, to like exactly what we knew was going to motivate them. So we've been hanging out with them for 3 years before the sale.
Yeah,
right.
That makes sense.
But you don't have to view it as just like that. It's always going to be this way. It could be you're going to like take that strategy that you talked about, like embrace that in the beginning, maximize your cash avoid the dilution that Andrew's talking about. And then in the right moment in time, you can pivot your contract strategy, your cash strategy to maximize.
So related to revenue, of course, is cost of sales, which I want to think about as being important. What are some key lessons or things to be aware of for, in particular, the SaaS business around cost of sales? So generally, my experience has been in that world. As soon as everybody moved away from licenses to SaaS, we don't have any cost of sales. Well, maybe there's a little bit of hosting, whatever, but it's. We'll consider that OpEx, or it's minor. So I don't know what we're 95%. Everyone's 95%. So what do people need to be aware of in terms of sales commissions or hosting costs or other cloud-based issues, implementation costs, or these things where you can just sort of chuck it all in the OpEx, or what things do people?
The most cost of sales as a concept is nowhere near, in my mind, complex. It tends to be a more straight calculation and is not as much areas of judgment. The big area of judgment that comes through is development and those type of costs. Do I capitalize those things? Do I end up putting it on my balance sheet instead of running it through, etc.? Do I end up lowering my costs but building up something? And that's a big decision point I see from a lot of companies where they're saying, well, I think this is the right thing to do. I'll put it on my balance sheet. I'll make my margins look better. I'll make my OpEx look better. I'll have a better P&L, and therefore I want that it'll make me. The recommendation and the pitfall I find people get into, the bar on an accounting side is really high to put something on your balance sheet when it's an internal cost like that.
More specifically, when you're considering that bar, what's that?
You have to have technical feasibility, and you have to have demonstrated very it depends on the type of GAAP, whether you're Canadian GAAP, which is ASPE, IFRS, US GAAP, but the technical feasibility has to be already demonstrated. You have to show